and welcome to the Research Works podcast, brought to you in association with Curtin University and the Healthy Strides Foundation. Your hosts are Dr. Dana Poole and Dr. Ashley Thornton, and together we will interview world-leading researchers in the area of child health to support your practice in being more evidence-based.
The team at the Research Works podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land and waters on which we live and work. We pay our respects to all First Nations peoples, elders past and present, and would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we record this podcast each week, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. We recognise their continued connection to this beautiful budja we call home.
Hello everyone, I'm so glad that you've joined us for another episode of the Research Works podcast. A slightly different panel here today because unfortunately Ash is unwell. As is our world today, things are still a little bit unpredictable, but we're so lucky to have back on the show Marissa Smith. Welcome back, Marissa.
Thanks for having me. I love being back, and I love this new space.
I know. Can you guys even tell? This is amazing. We've got a new table, we've got some new shelves, and we've even decorated. I think I put my hand to some decorations yesterday, and I'm not really an interior designer by any means, but I had some pictures to look at on Pinterest and a few ideas that I could put behind it. So I hope you enjoy. And if you do zoom in to have a look at some of the background, you'll see some clinical books and then you'll see some children's books. So you'll enjoy the whole
I absolutely I love it. I am so excited today because we have a returning guest to the show, Dr. Bhooma Aravamuthan. Welcome. Welcome, Bhooma.
Hi, thanks for having me. Excited to be back.
Oh, we love that you've come back. And even more so, we love the fact that we can build on what we previously spoke about. I think that's the best thing.
Yay. I love that we can build on it too. Yes, here's to keeping on building.
I love it. And that just shows, that is the power of research, isn't it? You find one thing, you're like, okay, well, let's follow this path, and it's following the evidence is sort of how we love to talk about it. So well, before we get into that, I'm very excited to talk about it. Marissa, I think we should tell everyone a little bit more about Bhooma again, because it has been just a few years since we last spoke with you. I can't believe we can say a few years on the podcast. That was so cool.
Okay, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Bhooma. Bhooma is an assistant professor of neurology and pediatrics at the Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis, Missouri, all the way from the US of A. When it comes to expertise in cerebral palsy and pediatric movement disorders, particularly with dystonia, Bhooma is widely published. Her recent work demonstrates her broad collaborations with leading experts in this field, and we are so very lucky to have an opportunity to speak with her on the podcast again today.
Golly gosh, that's amazing. Absolutely amazing. I love seeing your name come up when I follow you on Twitter and I see all the things that you're doing. It's so brilliant. It's absolutely so brilliant. So yes, thank you for coming back, and let's delve in a little bit more to understand, what makes us us. To the icebreaker question.
Okay, so here it is. Here it is, icebreaker time. What is your biggest DIY success or failure? Would you like to go first?
I would be happy to go first. You guys are sitting in front of a massive DIY success. I feel like my DIY skills are always at best part success, part failure. So when we actually first moved to St. Louis, it was with our twins were 6 months old. Wow. And we moved into a 2-bedroom apartment. It was very sterile. And I thought, I'm going to make like these amazing wall hangings and put them up for them in the apartment. And so I made a wall hanging for my son, Neil, of clouds in the sun, which is representative of his name. The meaning of his name is that. Oh, wow. And then for my other son, Singham, his name means lion. So I made a wall hanging of a lion with felt, and we hung it up in the apartment. And the goal was to finally get them framed. And then when we moved into our house, hang them up in our house. I never did that. So they are now on the floor of both of their bedrooms. We have since had a third child. I very ambitiously made a wall hanging for her with a parrot representative of her name. That's also on the floor of her room. So there were just these 3 felt wall hangings, massive wall hangings, 5 feet by 5 feet that I made that are just
Wow.
on the floor.
Oh, wow. They're
they're just on
decent
the floor.
size too. Wow.
Yeah, they're massive. They're massive. And I spent hours on each of them, and I just never closed. I never put them up on the wall.
Can I ask how old your sons
They're
are?
still there.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, how old are your sons?
The boys are 5. And the youngest is 3.
I'm just impressed you
love
made it
that.
again for your daughter. So that's good. You did follow through on that.
They exist. They're just not, they're more rugs than they are wall hanging.
Floor art.
Yeah. You've just repurposed them. I love that.
Floor art. That's right.
Yeah.
Maybe it is 100% success. It's floor art.
I think so. We can turn it around. We can always turn it around, like the ever optimist, really. Great question. And the unfortunate part is all I can think of is failures, because I always think things seem simpler than they actually are, right? So because people who are really good at their art, they do it seamlessly and you're like, oh, I could do that. And so there's 2 things. They also relate to art and hanging things up on the wall, which is quite an interesting thing. We can probably delve a little bit deeper into the psyches there, Bhooma. But for me, it was like I always thought that abstract art was something that I could do because, you see this artwork and you're like, oh, these colours, it's just splashed on there and, a bit of paintbrush kind of goes and you kind of make these little spray patterns. I'm like, I can do it. I spent all this money getting an easel, getting a canvas. I'm like, I can do abstract art. It was terrible. Absolutely awful. There's nothing that made sense about it. There was nothing particularly beautiful about it. And I thought, look, I'm gonna persist. And I tried to hang some up on my wall. This is years ago now. And because I was too lazy to even get a drill out, and I was like, it's just too hard. I'm just gonna use commando strips. And so I tried to follow the instructions, and I'm like, oh, I don't really need to wipe down the wall, like with the alcohol thing. And I've wiped it down enough. It's fine. Put it up. All good. Next day, all on the ground, complete failure. I'm like, well, that was my whole art life and I've never done it again. So that would be my DIY.
I think you could try again though.
I don't know. I was a bit ambitious, but I wasn't.
Maybe you're a Van Gogh of your time and that posthumously that art is going to be incredibly valuable.
I think so. I like it. Yep. Like your thoughts.
Thank you for looking at it positively there again for me. I really do appreciate that.
Now, I too can only think of failures. And originally I was going to say the soak well that did not work when we moved into our first house. But also the biggest thing in Australia, we like lamingtons. Do you know what a lamington is, Bhooma?
Yes.
Yes.
I do.
For earlier this year, I really wanted to make lamingtons from scratch and I thought, how hard can this be? So I bought a kit and you make the sponge cake and then you dip them in chocolate and coat them in coconut. Simple enough. But what happens is when you put the lamington into the chocolate, my lamington fell apart. The coconut went everywhere. I probably had 3 out of 20 that actually took shape. Needless to say, I will not make lamingtons again and I will buy them from the shops and be very grateful for their perfect form.
Again, sometimes it's just better to go to the people who do them all the time.
I'm very happy to do that.
There's just absolute skill involved in that. Are we ready to get into the paper?
Let's do it.
Let's go to the next great success. This is a great DIY success here, Bhooma. So let me tell you a little bit about the paper we'll be talking about today. So the aim of this study was to determine the movement features governing expert assessment of gait dystonia severity in ambulant children with cerebral palsy. In this prospective cohort study, neurologists graded lower extremity dystonia severity in gait videos of individuals with cerebral palsy using the Global Dystonia Severity Scale. In addition to this, open source pose estimation techniques were used to determine gait variable analogues to correlate with the assessments of dystonia severity. So of the 116 participants of children aged between 10 and 20 years, variable limb adduction was most commonly cited to identify dystonia. Gait variables assessing adduction, variability and amplitude such as inter-ankle distance, variance and foot adduction amplitude were significantly correlated with expert assessment of dystonia severity. So this means that adduction variability and amplitude are quantifiable gait features that correlate with expert-determined gait dystonia severity in individuals with cerebral palsy. And such a finding could help clinicians to optimise and standardise clinical gait assessment in children with dystonia. Oh, I love this so much.
This is brilliant.
It is so very good. Very, very good. And I do say adduction. I do notice I do that because I think that's all just from training. It's abduction or adduction.
That's how we were taught. So
that's how we were taught
too.
It just came through.
I do that too.
You do it too?
Yeah. I do it too.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay,
that
so
is
we're
an
all
international similarity.
I love that.
Now, Bhooma, I loved your last podcast because I felt like dystonia is something that when I started in pediatrics and working in this area, spasticity is something a bit easier to grasp because it's a bit more concrete in terms of assessment and how you, can see it in when a children is doing functional tasks, etc. But dystonia is, like you said, it's so variable and it presents so differently across the GMFCS levels. And I think at times, like you said, it is very prevalent. I know you mentioned that 13 to 15%. I think of children with cerebral palsy will have dystonia as their main feature. But anyway, we'll go into this more. But I love going into this topic because it is something that as a therapist, I think is something we don't naturally learn or understand as easily from the start. So it's things like today that will really increase our knowledge on this.
Yeah.
So can you just, for those that are new to the podcast, can you describe what is dystonia and how does it affect function?
Sure. So dystonia is voluntary movement triggered overflow muscle activation at its most basic sort of standardized definition level. So that means that every time a person with dystonia tries to move, a part of their body that they did not intend to move moves out of their control. And if you think about that line in and of itself, the functional effect of dystonia is clear. Every time you try to make a movement, a part of your body that you didn't intend to move moves out of your control. I mean, that lack of control over your ability to do the task you actually intended to do is inherently functionally debilitating. On top of that, dystonia is often associated with pain. So it's a very commonly cited cause of pain in people with CP. And it's a bit of a misunderstanding. Some people think that dystonia is not painful, but many people with CP cite it as a cause of pain.
Sure.
And it's also seen more commonly in people at GMFCS levels 4 and 5, and vice versa. So people at GMFCS levels 4 and 5 have more dystonia. If you have dystonia, you're more likely to be a GMFCS level 4 and 5. So that that relationship is reciprocal. Very common, a bit nebulously defined. You said that therapists don't necessarily get that concrete education about what is dystonia at the outset. Nobody does, honestly. And I remember being told as a movement disorders fellow, and theoretically movement disorders physicians pride themselves on being excellent phenomenologists, excellent phenotypers.
Yes.
That's our bag, right? Dystonia was just, you'll know it when you see it. You really, I mean, you'll figure it out. The 100th time you see it, you'll know what it is. And come on, we can do better than that. We can do better than that. That can't be how we define something that is so common, so functionally debilitating, such a thing that guides our treatment. You'll know it when you see it. I mean, that can't be the status quo that we're happy with.
That's right.
And so my career has been dedicated to that, to saying that status quo is not enough, we need to be better.
Yep. Love that.
And that brings me to my next question. And I love the work you've done in this area. How is dystonia measured?
And
I know there's a few different scales, but
So there are a couple different ways to think about it. So there are validated scales to measure dystonia severity. Validated in people with cerebral palsy. So the BADS, the Barry Albright Dystonia Severity Scale, that's probably the oldest, the one that maybe people have heard most. There's the Movement Disorders Childhood Rating Scale. That one has recently been validated in people with CP and with dystonia predominant CP. There's another scale which I've grown increasingly fond of, which is the Dyskinetic Cerebral Palsy Functional Impact Scale, which is a caregiver reported scale, once you've already been diagnosed with dystonia, you look to see, and once you're able to identify what that dystonia looks like in the person affected by CP, you can say, this is how it functionally affects me in these different ways.
Yes. Yeah.
That I think is particularly valuable.
Yes.
The kicker to me for all of these is that they were developed with sort of this general conceptualization that dystonia is has to be described generally across all people,
yes,
across all tasks, across all limbs or parts of the body. And it can't, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Dystonia looks very different depending on the cause.
Yeah.
So depending on the cause, depending on the task that triggers it, and depending on the part of the body that's affected. So we in this paper and the last one that I talked about on this podcast, we're attempting an effort to be more granular and say, you know, we should really start thinking about dystonia looks like this in people with CP in this part of the body during this task.
Yes.
It is task dependent. It is person dependent. It's body part dependent. So let's stop pretending that we can define it so generically. I mean, we've not done well at that for years, decades. So let's get granular about it.
Look, I love that, Bhooma. I think there's been a lot of just sort of, it almost feels like we're sort of tiptoeing around it sometimes, isn't it? And we're not really getting into the detail. You only need to work with a few people with dystonia to realize how different it is. I love how you've described that. You know, I'll work with some kids where if it's particularly windy or it's cold and, you know, wind brushes against their leg and that kind of, because it's sensory, and then suddenly they go into this big movement and they get stuck. And that happens for one, but it doesn't happen for another. So there's so many things there to look at. And I love you brought up about your previous paper. Just absolutely adore it. It's this to remind everyone, you know, there was this qualitative thematic analysis, which I'd never seen done before. It was brilliant. And it was codifying responses about what we would see for dystonia. And one of the features I remember coming out that has always stuck with me was this variable unilateral foot-leg adduction was a commonly cited motor feature. And I think what that does for many clinicians is that it just hones in on the task of walking. When you do see that, what does that mean? And makes you think deeper about it rather than going, oh yeah, that's just part of their gait pattern. But what is it? So just to build on that now, why did you go on to do this paper? Like, what was the main aim from it, and what was the main purpose, I suppose? Yeah.
So we wanted to expand on that initial work where we looked at how experts identified presence or absence of dystonia. And we wanted to expand on that to see how experts identified dystonia severity. What made them say dystonia was mild in the legs or moderate or severe in the legs? What were the features that they cited? And then if we could figure out metrics that experts seem to sort of by gut check use to assess these severities. Could we quantify it? Was there a way for us to say we can assign a number to that? And was there a way for us to quantify it in a real world clinic setting that could be broadly applicable? So those were the goals, which I think which we started to work on achieving with this paper.
Yeah, brilliant. Again, a DIY success for sure.
Definitely a DIY. Well, it's a DIY, yes. It's the beginning of what I hope will eventually be a full-scale DIY success for assessing dystonia across the whole body in people with CP in a qualitative and quantitatively specific way.
So I love how this one really brings in that quantitative component to it. So it's just that beautiful mixed methods again, isn't it? And it's reflective of real life.
Absolutely. And the qualitative led to this, didn't it? It kind of gave you the ideas that then to be really bring in the specificity. I should never say that word. Bring it into the study, which brings me to my next point about who was included in this study. Because I know you said obviously dystonia predominantly affects GMFCS levels 4s and 5s, but for this study looking at Gait, you focused on GMFCS 1s to 3s. And can you chat to us a bit more about the other inclusion criteria for the study?
Sure. So we, like you said, we included people who were independently ambulatory. So people at GMFCS 1 to 3.
Mm-hmm.
The reason for that is because we wanted a task that was functionally relevant and somewhat comparable across the group of people that we were assessing.
Yep.
And I will say that is one of the biggest weaknesses in my mind of this paper is that we are limiting it to people at GMFCS 1 to 3 by picking that Gait task. And I'm happy to talk about the plan for 4s and 5s and incorporating that population a little bit.
Great. Yeah.
The other thing that we really made sure about for this paper was to make sure that everybody we included had spasticity.
Yep.
And that is, I think, mission critical for anybody who's looking to develop metrics for identifying dystonia in people with CP.
Great.
As a rule, as we all know, people with CP have mixed tone.
Yeah.
It's very rare to see someone that's pure anything.
Yeah.
Someone
that's right. Yeah.
it's people are mixed at all sorts of levels, spasticity plus axial hypotonia.
Yeah.
Even though, as you guys have said, 13 to 15% of people have dystonia as their predominant form of tone in CP. Up to 80% of people have some degree of dystonia. So that overlaid on top of spasticity, it's very hard to pick out.
That's
and
right.
if you don't develop metrics that differentiate dystonia from spasticity,
Yeah.
you're not really serving the needs of this population. So that was the other big factor that we considered when we included subjects.
It's really real world, isn't it? And I guess that's what it comes down to. It's, when we do research studies, sometimes you try to be very homogenous in your population. You want to define the very features and control, and that tells you a lot of information for sure. But when applying into a real world context, you do have all these factors to consider, and 100% you're always trying to sort of understand what's spasticity, what's dystonia, and the only way this can be really applicable is to have that. So that's absolutely brilliant. So now that leads me to my next question, which I'm very excited to hear about. How are they actually assessed? And I want to start by talking about maybe the videos that you used for it, because this is very cool.
Oh, thank you. So so we started out as you said, qualitative, and then moved to quantitative. So we had 3 different pediatric movement disorders physicians view videos of 116 young people as they walked in a straight line towards the camera.
Yeah.
And they were recorded in different clinic hallways over the span of several years at our CP center. So, and they were all recorded on an iPad. So at resolution, that's by modern smartphone standards, a bit embarrassing, but that's how we did it.
Yep.
And they were all clinical recordings that we did for the purposes of clinical care. And we had them review those videos, rate them using a scale called the Global Dystonia Severity Rating Scale, which we chose to use because it's just a 10-point Likert scale. So 0 being no dystonia, 5 being moderate, 10 being severe.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
And it gives no other, there are no other preconceived sort of guidelines for how you should rate dystonia. That's it. It's just a Likert scale.
Okay.
And we wanted that because we wanted to see what experts really pragmatically used to rate dystonia severity.
Yeah.
They then wrote in what they put in their scores. They wrote in why they chose those scores, why they said dystonia or no dystonia. And then we went back and coded all those responses. Found coded meaning extracted the salient ideas from each of those responses, looked at the frequency with which those were said. And then found the variable leg and foot adduction being significantly associated with those dystonia severity scores.
Sure.
And then we went back with using those same videos with free open source software called Deep Lab Cut. And we created a model on those videos that allowed us to measure the distance between the knees, the ankles, the toes, and then look at the AP foot angle. And found that those quantified values also correlated with the qualitative expert severity scores
Oh,
So we
that's a cool finding.
with free software,
Yeah.
we're able to get numbers that correlated quite nicely with the qualitative scores of experts that up until that point would tell you that dystonia is, oh, you'll know it when you see it. Now we have numbers that match up, which is pretty cool.
That's awesome.
That is so brilliant. That must have been so wonderful to actually see that in, when you're analysing all your data and you finally come to this place where you can actually summarize it, you'd be like, that would have been a great moment to have seen that. Tell me more about the deep lab cut. I've heard it before through doing some Gait courses, and I love that it's a free software, so people can download it anywhere. Like it's quite easy to access.
Yeah, it's available through Mackenzie Mathis's lab. If you just Google Deep Lab Cut, it'll take you right to her website. A few years ago, there was a series of papers in Nature Neuroscience that were published on this technique, and it was originally built out and used most commonly in people doing animal behavioral work, which is what I do with the rest of my time actually is I'm a mouse behavioralist also. So that's where I'd heard about this.
Oh, wow.
And I started this project started at this point right before the pandemic. So it's been about 3 years, kind of conceptualizing and building this project using that software. That you can download and then train. It's a neural network based pose estimation tool.
Okay.
So you can train a neural network to recognize parts of the body that you label on a set of example videos.
Fabulous.
Since then, Deep Lab Cut was one of the originals, not the original, but one of the originals.
Sure.
There are other. This field has exploded. So since just in those last 3 years, other open source pose estimation software like OpenPose is another very common one. There's OpenCap. There are a lot of different free pose estimation software options available now that are specifically targeted to labeling people as they're walking. And this field is it's exploding. It's a really exciting time to be a movement disorders person, a behavioralist. There's a lot that can be done in the modern era, and it's all just kind of taken off in the last few years.
Awesome.
Gosh,
and I love how
exciting.
It is something like you did it on an iPad. I mean, a lot of people, if they're fortunate enough to have an iPad or some sort of device, whether it's a smartphone or that can take that footage, how hard is it to train someone to do that in terms of, where did you put the camera and did you have to put markers on the knee and ankle and foot to measure it up?
So we don't put markers on our patients or our subjects for this. Ideally, you want to make sure that they're bare feet and that their knees are exposed, because we need at least knees, ankles, and toes fully exposed to do this, and no orthotics, no socks on. I will tell you that these videos, somewhat shockingly, were all taken handheld by someone, no tripod, no standard distance. They were all handheld videos, which was on the back end a nightmare. So to what we call clean the data, it was just hours and hours.
Wow.
And this ended up being like a Christmas project of mine about a year ago, to go through hundreds of videos and find the usable videos that had data where the camera was stable enough that I thought we would be able to get clean data from it. So now what we're doing in the clinic is we're just using smartphones. So we're using Google Pixels, actually, really cheap ones that we got off Amazon.
Fabulous.
But you don't have to use, I'm not endorsing any specific company. You can use whatever you want. But you don't have to get fancy. We're using smartphones, and we're using a tripod, and we've marked where we have the tripod on a hallway, and we mark where we want our kid to start walking, and we mark where we want them to end.
Yep.
And that's it. It's
amazing.
tape and a $300 investment on Amazon.
Wow.
Yeah.
Look, and I think that it's just so refreshing to know that you can add this layer of an ability to objectively quantify something, which I think is so important, right? Like, you remember the days where we were measuring goniometer measurements and, people would eyeball them and you'd be like, are you sure that's 70 degrees? Like, what is it? Let's measure it properly. Because at the end of the day, a lot of our treatments are based on these measurements that we might take. Is someone improving from this medication? Is this intervention actually working? And we need some way of quantifying it. And you just told us about something that people who work clinically in the community can do quite easily without, a lot of technical expertise. That to me is really inspiring. Hey, like it's huge, so reproducible.
Because I think you said in the first podcast that, when you see a patient for the first time in a clinic, you might not see their dystonia like it usually presents on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
So I think this is where collaboration between the community and the hospital system and healthcare, because we know that gives the optimal results. So whether it's footage taken by the community therapist or even a family member that could be used to show the clinician and help them objectively identify dystonia, which will impact treatment, is amazing. And so I think this study, you've really shown us the value of that.
Oh, well done. So good.
Thanks.
So good. I can just feel what it would have been like to go through that data and to have gone through all of that to be able to quantify. So I guess some of the more specifics now, and I know that, in terms of things that you did measure, there were things like inter-knee distance, inter-ankle distance, and foot-to-ankle minimum. Can you go through some of the specifics of what you actually saw there in your results?
Sure. So each of those variables were pre-selected to mimic the statements that experts made about dystonia severity. So when we say foot angle minimum, and I'm gonna pretend, hopefully you can see my hand, right? I'm just gonna pretend that this is an ankle and this is a toe. So when we were quantifying foot angle, and let's say this is my knee, we were going knee, ankle, toe. What is this? And if this is medial and this is lateral, we were looking at this angle here.
Right.
So if a foot is turning in, this angle decreases.
Yes.
If a foot is turning out, this angle increases.
Okay. Yep.
And I have to apologize to the true 3D gait kinematics people, because these are all 2D assessments. It is very difficult to find a true 3D correlate to assessments you're only making in 2D.
Yeah, of course.
But I will say that when we assess these videos, we are trying to draw 3D conclusions from 2D data.
Yeah.
And that's what we tried to do here as well. So foot angle minimum was foot turning in here.
Great.
Inter-ankle distance between the feet was how close the ankles were.
Yep.
How close the toes were to each other was inter-toe distance. And then how close the knees were.
Sure.
And then we looked at the variability of those measures. So the variance of those measures over the course of a few gait cycles during the video.
Yeah.
With the idea that, as you've brought up, variability being such a cardinal feature of dystonia, we hypothesized that if we looked at the variability of the adduction between the legs over the course of the video, that we'd see a correlation with dystonia severity as well.
Wow.
And what we saw was exactly that. So the variability of, and I'm going to pull up the exact metrics, so I'm being very specific here. So inter-ankle distance variability and that foot angle minimum. So how much those feet turned in, that amplitude of adduction of the foot, the variability and how far apart the ankles were over the course of the video, those really correlated quite nicely with increasing qualitative expert severity scores. So the higher the expert graded severity, the more variable that adduction was in the inter-ankle distance, and the more the feet turned in, with increasing expert severity scores.
That is really cool.
What I find is so important, because you think you can see something, but when a child, especially GMFCS, or even 1s, 2s and 3s, they can walk really fast and you won't necessarily catch that variability to the extent that makes you describe it as dystonia without using what you said, which is what makes the tool so valid.
Yeah.
And I've got to tell you this is teasing a different paper that's about to come out next week, but we think we're a lot better at diagnosing dystonia than we actually are. We're pretty bad at it in routine clinical assessment. The same group of experts that rated all of these videos. I mean, that's not real clinical. That's not what really happens in the clinic, right? You have your predefined clinic slot.
Yeah.
You're not sitting there getting to watch someone walk over and over again on replay at your leisure in the clinic visit, trying to see who does or does not have dystonia. So we had these experts rate all these videos, right? And then we went back to those same experts' clinic notes from the same day that these videos were taken.
Yes.
And I mean, I kind of just want to ask you, so of everybody that we know for sure on the videos had leg dystonia, what percentage do you think had leg dystonia diagnosed on the same clinic day by the same set of experts?
I'm going to put a number to it. Oh, Marissa.
Put a number, just guess.
I don't know. I feel like you're teasing that it will be low, but I don't.
It will be. It is low. It's low. But how low do you think it is?
What, 20%?
Yeah, let's go 20.
13%.
Oh. Oh, wow.
13%. Yeah. It increases with longitudinal assessment. So maybe they didn't see it that day.
Great,
but the longer you follow a person, it gets higher and higher. And it gets to almost, 100% for people with moderate to severe dystonia with longitudinal assessment, but not in that clinic visit.
Wow.
Not in that clinic visit.
Wow.
So in the same clinic visit, it's not even people with moderate to severe dystonia. So in people with moderate to severe dystonia, about 40 to 50% had it diagnosed in that clinic visit.
Wow. I mean, that's interesting on so many levels. No, you go. Yeah. I'll keep
No.
thinking.
I mean, it's just, it's to say, and these are people that are supposed to be the best in the business at doing it, right? I call them experts in this paper.
Yeah. Well,
I just think we need to be humble about what expertise really is.
Yeah.
And understand that I think for a long time we've thought that to diagnose dystonia, it's a training problem. Like, if we could only teach those community so-and-sos to be able to diagnose dystonia, but that's not what it is. It's a systems issue.
Yeah.
If even people who've dedicated all of their training and their lives to identifying movement disorders in people with cerebral palsy only do it at 13% of the time in any single clinic visit.
Yeah.
That's not a training problem. That's a systems problem.
Yeah.
So we need systems-based solutions.
Yeah. And what does that look like? What's an example of a system-based solution that can support that? Because there's a lot, the exciting thing in a way is there's a lot of room to grow. From 13%, we're going to be able to track that and improvement's going to be wonderful, right? Well, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it has to be multimodal.
Yep.
So one aspect is making sure that you do record videos of your kids whenever you can. Yeah. Sorry, I say kids. They're kids for me. People at any age of CP that you're evaluating, just so you have the opportunity to look back at those videos. Hopefully developing very detailed guidance on what dystonia is so we can tell people what to look for, but also to develop tools like these quantitative tools that can give you a bit of a leg up. Like if there's a way to get those videos and say, if I process this video in a certain way, the chance that this person has dystonia is this, that's good. And then I think relying on, being humble that, as you put it, it's valuable to have expertise outside, longitudinal expertise from what they look like, what people with CP look like at home. And I think being really explicit or really thoughtful about making sure that you talk to the families of people with CP and see what expertise they can bring to the table about what movements look like at home for themselves or for the person they care for. And then just being really thoughtful to not forget it. Like dystonia is important. Make sure you're documenting it, yes or no, every clinic visit. And make sure that if you said no the last clinic visit, you're not just assuming no forever, that you're checking every single clinic visit.
Yeah.
And what does this mean for clinicians? So you mentioned about the importance of footage, but clinicians working with children with dystonia, what you've learned from this paper, what can it do? How can it impact these children and the clinicians?
Yeah. So I think one way to think about it is to use that qualitative data. So when you're watching someone walk, to look for that variable foot and leg adduction as they're walking and say, is that a sign of dystonia that I would not have diagnosed otherwise? The other is to work with, maybe if you have a Gait lab in your institution, or even if you don't, to start delving into some of these quantitative metrics, maybe use some of that free software that's available, and see if you can start collecting videos on your families, on your kids, on the people with CP you treat, and see if you can try your hand at analyzing it this way. I would be happy to help. I think the more people that are doing this, the better. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me about it.
That's so generous. That's so lovely. And I think knowing that there's people around that can help us with these things, I think is wonderful. And that's what creates that movement, right? I keep talking about this, one person doing it, a few people doing it, great, but you've got more people doing it, there's a movement, and we can really just improve that from 13% to something much higher. Because what goes on in my mind as a clinician is I go, if we can quantify this properly, then we can be more targeted with our interventions. I can only imagine that, for what we do, it might be orthotics. How many times do we have children who don't tolerate their ankle foot orthoses? Now, is that because of dystonia and how their leg is moving within the AFO? So if they were to have botulinum toxin or something a little bit more targeted for dystonia, which as a neurologist I'm sure you do all the time, we would want to see if there's a change, and whether that means functionally it means they can walk for longer distances without tripping or with less pain. How else do you see this being used clinically? Because in my mind, I'm already going to ankle foot orthoses and how can we improve that?
Well, I think to me, I think the severity aspect of it can be used more immediately to develop treatments for clinical use. I think that part of the reason clinical trials for dystonia and CP, and we have so little data on treatments for dystonia and CP, and part of the reason it's been hard is that it's so hard to diagnose in a standardized way and rate in a standardized way. I think this allows people to speak the same, at least quantitative language across centers to be able to track treatment response. So that's one way. I want to be very cautious about saying that we can use it to track severity currently clinically.
Sure.
This data was a snapshot of individual patients, and we haven't necessarily tried it in the same patient or in the same person to track their response to treatment. And that is something that we're working on.
Okay.
But I think we can, that is a next step goal.
Sure.
But until we get there, I think it's very promising, but I don't necessarily want to say that it's ready for that level of prime time yet.
Sure. So hold our
hopefully
horses,
one day
hold our horses, getting there. But that's the thing, though. I think you can see where it's going to head, and that's really awesome to know. And I think in the meantime, it sounds like we can just practice and be better at identifying and working with each other to improve our skills. Yeah, that's a great message, Bhooma.
Absolutely. Now, look, you touched on earlier about some to do with GMFCS 4s and 5s and what, this means and where you're headed in that direction with looking at dystonia. Can you share more on that?
Yes, I would love to. So this is a paper that that we're currently writing. In separate work, where we were looking at upper extremity dystonia in people across GMFCS levels while they were seated and doing a variety of upper extremity tasks. there was one task that experts kept citing, and we use the same qualitative analysis techniques to initially sort of parse, what is and is not dystonia, what are the features that are salient. The exam maneuver that experts cited most commonly when trying to identify mild dystonia, so videos where they weren't sure, is it dystonia, is it not? They kept coming back to this one exam maneuver, and it was this hand open close task where you alternate hand open close with one hand in your lap and the other hand opening and closing your hands. So we initially looked at that for upper extremity dystonia and found some features that were representative of upper extremity dystonia. But we also, we initially only looked at those videos in the arms. But when you look at those same videos in the legs, you see that the same features, this variable adduction at the knees, ankles, and toes, shows up again in the legs of people with dystonia as they're doing the seated hand open close task. So this can look for leg dystonia in people while they're doing upper extremity tasks across all GMFCS levels. And we found that those same metrics that we saw correlated with dystonia severity in this paper during walking correlated with expert-rated dystonia severity in the legs during the seated task in people all across all GMFCS levels.
Wow.
Yeah. So that is
wow.
So that was very exciting to us. We're working on that paper now.
Okay.
That was a group of just under 200 videos that we assessed.
Wow, okay.
And we asked for movement disorders physicians, 8 movement disorders physicians from 8 different institutions across the United States to rate these videos. So a really robust data rating set to look at that. So that's the on the horizon
I'm excited.
Those 2 projects.
Okay.
There's lots to look forward to. And I think that you've given us a few teasers, but you haven't left us, just hanging. So I'm grateful that you've shared some of that already, because that would have been really hard. That's amazing. Well, Bhooma, as usual, the conversation with you, I feel like we could talk forever, but it is later into the night for you, so we can't keep going. We are aware of this time difference we have. So let's wrap this up in the most well-liked segment, I would say, within the whole podcast, and that is called Tell It to Ed. Ed, as you know, is our producer. He doesn't have a background in child health, but he's been listening and he's been quite influential with a lot of his questions, so it seems. So Ed, we're going to get you to be able to ask a question after Bhooma summarises the body of work that she's just spoken about. And it's just one question, Ed, but I know he's been taking liberties lately. So to Bhooma, take it away.
Great. Well, I'm so happy to be here again. Today we talked about dystonia and how we need to be humble about our ability to identify it. And one way that we think we might be able to get a little bit better at identifying it in the clinic. We talked about looking at dystonia in people with CP and spasticity during Gait and showing that variable leg and foot adduction is both a qualitative and quantitative marker of leg dystonia severity in people with CP.
Oh, lovely summary. Lovely summary, Ed.
Wow.
Welcome.
Thank you.
He's been here the whole time.
Can I interject that Ed's question from last podcast is this paper is almost it's a close to direct response to Ed's question from last podcast. So
I can feel my head getting
brace
bigger
yourself.
and bigger.
Let's see, what paper am I going to write next?
Oh my gosh, we're not going to be able to get him out of the studio. His head's so big.
See, I've never felt pressure until this very moment about my question.
No.
Well, Bhooma, I've really enjoyed that conversation. It kind of touches a little bit on some of the things that I'm kind of familiar with in IT and video editing. So I kind of feel your pain about the whole video editing stuff. When I'm not editing podcasts or writing software, I do dabble in videography and editing. I have to admit, it's really exciting about markerless movement analysis. I've actually had a really quick play with the Open Pose software, and it's very, very impressive. And as far as I know, it's been trained on huge amounts of data for pose estimation. And I'm assuming lots of those open source softwares are very similar in that sense. I guess I'm curious as to what kind of real-time feedback can be given as a platform for families or clinicians, researchers or specialists. So you said that the analysis was kind of rated by experts. I guess if it's being fed through machine learning for non-supervised analysis, can a diagnosis be output really easily? I guess I'm asking if there are any plans to open up this kind of analysis more broadly.
Oh. Yeah. So, yes, there is. And there's a postdoc in my lab working on that question right now, actually. Wow. So Ed, you're right. Next paper. I will say the thing that I do think that when we think about completely unsupervised differentiation between people who we have identified as having, these experts have identified as having dystonia versus not dystonia. Something that my postdoc, Rishabh Bajpai, who started in the lab just a few months ago, said to me is, I don't know that I can trust the ground truth. And there was something he has an engineer background, and that was something he said to me. And I just think that's so valuable and something that we've brought up already in this session, that if dystonia for years has been identified as, when you see it and it's what your mentor taught you it was, there are some people that are definite no, and there are some people that are definite yes, and there are a bunch of people in the middle. So, and we do our best to pretend that we're all super reliable across the whole spectrum, but as it gets to milder and milder degrees, that reliability gets less and less. So we are working on it, Ed, but we're looking at the extremes of the spectrum first, so we can have a reliable ground truth before we look at the whole severity spectrum. Because I think at a ground truth level, what is and what is not dystonia, what I've really found over the last few years is not like, let's develop a quantitative way to diagnose it, but do we even really know what it is? So that is, I think addressing that question comes first before truly unsupervised differentiation between yes and no dystonia.
Oh, good question. Nice one. You was going to bring in something a little bit on the techie end there. Well, Bhooma, thank you so much for your time. We love talking with you, and I know that so many clinicians are going to be able to really walk away and think about things that they can do themselves and hopefully feel really inspired that they can do a lot of things without a lot of additional technology required. I mean, I think that's really, really cool, and I think knowing where this work is headed is an exciting thing for the field.
Yeah, thanks so much, Bhooma. And I know I have a real passion for gait analysis, and this is something I'm definitely going to take from our chat is looking for that. And so I'm really grateful. And I look forward to chatting again sometime about your next paper.
Yes, definitely. And keep asking me questions. I'll keep churning stuff out for you.
That's great. We love that. Absolutely love that. Well, to all of our listeners, remember, if you want links to this paper and all of our run sheet notes, head to our website, researchworks.net. And there's also a CPD form there that you can fill out if you want to keep this as a copy of your PD requirements. But for now, we thank you all again for tuning in. If you're on our YouTube stream, at least you'll be able to see what all those angles mean. This is great that there's video now. Check out our new studio, and we'll talk to you all again next time. Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye.